Some people think resilience is like high metabolism. You're either born with it or you're not. You can either eat all the chocolate you want and never gain a pound, or you can't. You're either one of those resilient people or you're not. Do you believe that? I don't. In my experience, resilience is all about how you prepare for, react to, and recover from life's challenges. In fact, resilience is like a muscle. It can be exercised and strengthened over time. Many of us have heard about post-traumatic stress, which is a very real thing. There's also a real thing called post-traumatic growth. It says that we can not only bounce back from adversity, we can bounce up. And isn't that what resilience is? Coming out of the other side of life's challenges with more strength, wisdom, and gratitude. Today, I will share with you 4 practical tips that I have learned about cultivating resilience. You might be wondering, wait, why am I listening to you talk about resilience? You're not a medical professional, and I am not at all. I run a creative agency. But we've all been through life's challenges, and perhaps more relevant, I and my family have cared for 17 young babies, children, and adults in our spare room. We have had the honor of front row seats to some of life's most amazing transformations. These young people have come from a very wide range of circumstances, from just simply feeling vulnerable or marginalized all the way to examples of horrific abuse. And today I will share with you 4 stories from our spare room and a lesson that I learned with each of those young people. Lesson number 1, hold things loosely. I would like to introduce to you Tim. He's a young teenager, tall, gangly, born and raised in Ohio, and often known as my houseboy. Just kidding. He used to spend more and more time with my husband and I as we were newly married, and in order to what he felt was earn his keep, he would do a lot of chores around the house, completely unnecessary, but it helped him feel good. So on the odd occasion that I would bring coworkers home from work, they would sometimes meet my houseboy, this tall, thin teenager with kind of tousled hair, donning a pink apron and running the vacuum. Tim eventually, through a long story, ended up deferring college for a year, and he came with us to Guangzhou when we were placed there on an expatriate assignment. After getting his passport and boldly taking on this endeavor, Tim arrived in Guangzhou with us. Early on, I realized Tim would need a bike to get around the city, and I asked him to please buy a bike helmet. Traffic was a little bit unexpected and raucous at times. So Tim came home with a reasonable bike, but instead of a typical safety helmet, he came home with a military helmet bought in a surplus store with a big red communist star. This is why we hold things loosely, friends. Instead of forcing him to go back and get a proper helmet, I thought, if it's good enough for the military, it's good enough for Tim. And so he rode around town, this thin guy on a little bike with a big old military helmet and, for good measure, military goggles that he bought. A couple weeks later, Tim came rushing home, hiccuping, nearly hysterical with sobs. He had ridden right by a little boy who had clearly passed away, lying under a bridge. Despite his best efforts, nobody nearby would help him for fear of being associated with the situation. And by the time that we went back to the bridge with Tim, the corpse had been removed. How I wish I could have taken that painful experience away from him. How many of you relate to that, of seeing a young person in such sorrow and pain and just wanting to take it away from them? And yet, that is not our job. These are exactly the life circumstances that build resilience. You see, our job isn't to shield young people from life's more difficult moments, or to too narrowly define what safety looks like, what a healthy lifestyle should be for an individual person. Rather, our job is to surround them with love, unconditional love, and cushion them with laughter. So we hold things loosely, and we help them build resilience. Tim is an incredible adult now, married to an incredible woman, and I know that all of those life experiences in Guangzhou have shaped the man that he is today. My second lesson, ask don't tell. I'd like to introduce you to Devin. She was a child bride who lived in and out of our home before marrying her husband and then after. A sensitive, loving girl from the Midwest, she was so in love with the man that she wanted to marry at only 16 years old. And yet, I found her man of choice to treat her condescendingly, even borderline abusively, which I told her. And yet I discovered the more that I told her I found his behavior unacceptable, the more she drew away from me and defended him. So instead, I started to ask, not tell. I would ask Devin, how does it make you feel when he shouts at you like that? Or when she saw my husband bringing me flowers or washing the dishes after dinner, I would ask her, hey, does he do that for you? Slowly, but perhaps more impactfully because she was making her own observations, Devin began to realize that her relationship wasn't a healthy one. She began to define what healthy boundaries would look like for her and defining what she wanted her relationship to be. Devin began to develop a sense of self and resilience. She didn't end up staying with him long term, but today is happily remarried with a number of children. Here's what I learned living with Devin for about half a year. Ask, don't tell. Instead of telling people what we think they should do or the behaviors we think they should adopt or what we find acceptable or not, we can simply ask questions and we can invest our energy in role modeling what we think is healthy behavior. Let them come to their own conclusions, and in the process, they learn more about themselves and they cultivate resilience. My third tip is to shift a mindset from consumption to contribution. One young man who stayed with us for a couple of months, I'm so sorry, but he was just greedy and self-centered. He moved into our apartment ready to take everything he could. Before he even put his bags down, he handed me his ironing and said, I'd like you to take care of that. He turned to our housekeeper and began sharing his dietary expectations with her. Delightful, right? How many of you might have just kicked him to the curb? I'm not going to lie, I thought about it. But here's a quick aside about social legacy. That is wanting to leave things better than we found them within our sphere of influence. We don't do these things because we expect a reward or gratitude. We don't do them only when they're easy or rewarding. We do them because they're the right thing to do. So we took some time and established some limits with this gentleman we will call Charles. We realized Charles wasn't a bad guy. He was simply selfish, had a narrow worldview, and didn't know how to think about things differently. Instead of telling him how we thought he ought to behave, we decided to focus on helping him shift from consumption to contribution. We began to connect him to the community around us. We brought him with us on short service projects when we got involved in the neighborhood, and also on bigger service projects where we invested in the social community around us. Friends, we can all benefit from contributing more, shifting that mindset. Because what happens is we begin to appreciate everything that we have. We become more immersed in humility and gratitude, and self-serving mindsets and behaviors simply dissipate. I can't say I know where Charles is anymore. We did not stay in touch, but I'm sure that that shift from consumption to contribution made a meaningful impact in the way that he viewed the world and his role within it. My fourth lesson is about the boy who lived with us for the longest period of time. The lesson is to be there when they fall, but don't hold them up. Teo was born with hydrocephalus, which meant that the cerebrospinal fluid that cushioned and lubricated his spine and brain could go up into his skull but couldn't come back down. As a result, his head swelled largely, painfully, and damagingly, and he had a really heavy head. It was like a 10-pound medicine ball when we first met him. Eventually, despite amazing odds, he was able to sit up, and he was even able to get around. He gained mobility, and one of the things he really wanted to do was to get up on the couch. But every time he tried to climb up on the couch, he would lose his balance and fall head first with a big thud. I still remember as tears flooded his eyes. They welled in my own. It was so painful to watch. And yet, the more I tried to help him, to hold him up in the process, the angrier he became. He would grit his teeth and say no. He wanted to do it himself. And I learned I shouldn't be there to hold him up, but I will always be there to catch him when he falls. You see, we help cultivate resilience when we're there to help on the recovery, not by mitigating the process. We shouldn't be jumping in mid-trial, but when we're always there at the end, helping them back up, encouraging and loving, what we're doing is blowing on those embers of hope. And yes, Teo did manage to get up on the couch by himself. Today, I just saw him today, literally today. He's walking perfectly. He goes up and down the stairs. He feeds himself. We laughed hysterically as we shared lunch today on a friend's patio. It is absolutely extraordinary what happens when we cultivate resilience. I'd like to end today's talk with a quick couple videos of our most recent spare room kid. He also, coincidentally, has hydrocephalus. Wayne came to us when he was already 4 years old, completely nonverbal and unable to manage any gross or fine motor skills. In the first video you'll see in November, he was unable to grasp even the food, though his mouth is moving, so you know that he has connected that this is something I would like to eat. But he hasn't managed to grasp the food, bring the food to his mouth, and consume it. 1 month later, you can see in the December video, hey, he's able to grasp the food. He's struggling to bring it into his mouth, but when he finally does, what he has learned to do is give a high five. And then just a couple months later, look at this little guy. I was so proud of him. And you can tell he's proud of himself because I didn't hold him up. I helped him when he couldn't manage to do it. And over time, he got better and better. And he was, in fact, able to feed himself. And that is a life skill wherever he ends up that will serve him. So, do you guys think we can cultivate resilience? I hope you're all shouting a wholehearted yes. You see, many of us have learned in life to avoid adversity, trauma, or tragedy. But in fact, some degree of stress in our lives is a good thing because it gives us opportunity to cultivate resilience. We might think, you know, if I can get through this, I can get through anything. That, my friends, is strength. We might suddenly realize, I only have this one precious life to live. I will live it to the best of my ability. That is wisdom. Or we may realize, this adversity doesn't define me. It's given me an opportunity to grow. That is gratitude. So, if we hold things loosely, ask, don't tell, shift our mindset from consumption to contribution, and be there when they fall, but don't hold them up through the process, we can help people do more than bounce back. We can help them build resilience so that they bounce up. And we get to be a part of people's journeys as they cultivate resilience, coming out of the other side of life's challenges with more wisdom, strength, and gratitude. Which of these 4 tips resonates the most with you? I'd love to hear about it. Write it down and think about, as you leave today's talk, how you might exercise at least one of these 4 tips more regularly in your day. Let's cultivate resilience.